1990, reels of 16mm black and white film were discovered in the basement of the University of Timișoara in Romania. The films probably date back to the 50s, originating from remote villages in the west of Romania, better known as Transylvania. The images show centuries-old traditions, carnival scenes and rituals of protection, families warding off ancestral ghosts, the so-called undead or strigoi. In the same part of Transylvania, in 1882, in this poor house, a child was born. "50 years later, this child would become famous all over the world as Count Dracula. This is the story of Bela Lugosi, the legendary actor who changed the face of horror forever. In 1927, a small theatre in Broadway decided to put on a stage production of Dracula, based on Bram Stoker's novel. But they couldn't find anyone to take the lead role. Broadway actors refused to play a character who was half human, half monster, with so much heavy makeup, and who also sucks women's blood. At the last minute, an unknown European actor came forward. He couldn't speak proper English and claimed he was born in Transylvania, like Dracula himself. He made one request, that he be allowed to interpret the character in his own way. The new play was an instant hit, and the name Bela Lugosi was on everyone's lips. His few lines allowed Lugosi to develop a very powerful character. His Dracula wasn't a monster. He was an aristocrat with a strong, hypnotic and erotic presence.
He was a very good actor. What he has done is a miracle because he didn't use any mask, any false teeth. He gave his own face, his own body, his own soul to Dracula's life.
Oh, how frightfully weird.
It isn't so much a makeup. It's rather expression.
I'm afraid I'll dream about this myself tonight.
He had a very strong sexuality. He knew a lot of things about desire, passion, and this is what he gave to Dracula character. It is a love story.
Some of the audience left the theatre believing Lugosi was in fact Dracula, and Dracula was Lugosi.
Oh, did the role depress you?
Very much. Haunted me. I often dreamed of the dead. In the morning when I woke up, I was tired, depressed.
He understood what does it mean to be undead. He understood that a passion can be so strong that you cannot die. A passion can be so strong that you die and you still have desire on the other world. And you should like to come back again, to continue. And this is the vampire myth.
The play toured the US and Lugosi's popularity soared. His stage performance was unique. But when Universal Studios bought the rights to make a film, Lugosi wasn't their first choice. Lugosi was sure that this was his chance, and he fought for it. He started a campaign, harassing the studios month after month, staking his claim to the role of Count Dracula.
Lugosi himself lobbied extensively for the role. He later claimed his hands got cramps from writing so often to both Universal as well as even to Bram Stoker's widow, trying to persuade them, I created this character on stage, I should be the one to play it in films.
In the meantime, Lugosi moved to Hollywood and was hired as a contract actor by the William Fox Company. He was given a couple of sinister roles: exotic sheiks, European crooks, and corrupt businessmen. Universal thought that his name, Lugosi, would be too difficult to promote, and his stage Dracula was too sophisticated for the screen. In the end, they chose Lon Chaney, the man with 1,000 faces. Unexpectedly, Lon Chaney was diagnosed with throat cancer and died. Now, Universal considered Lugosi for the film version of Dracula. He was so eager to get the part, he agreed to take a small salary. The film was released on Valentine's Day, 1931.
I am Dracula.
Dracula. The very mention of the name brings to mind things so evil, so fantastic, so degrading. You wonder if it isn't all a dream, a nightmare. But no, this is no dream. This is Dracula, the original terrifying story of a maniac and a man who lived after death, lived on human blood, took the form of a vampire bat, and lured innocent girls to a fate truly worse than death.
It was a huge success all over the world, and Bela Lugosi became the master of horror. Millions of fans were literally hypnotized by his on-screen performance.
It was a culture of danger, and Bela Lugosi represented a character who was a part of this culture of danger.
This was Lugosi's creation, and it was one that he had perfected in live theater before the film was even made.
We don't know who played first time Hamlet or King Lear, because the play is very good. But in this case, Lugosi's name is very important. Without Lugosi, there wasn't any Dracula myth.
Lugosi started receiving hundreds of letters from women across the globe. His potent blend of death and eroticism made him even more popular than the other major sex symbol of the time, Clark Gable.
The death and love is always very close to each other. When the love is strong, and you are not a Dracula in a normal life, and you lost your lover, you feel that he's still somewhere. The love, the passion never ends with the death. So death and love is very close to each other.
He had a kind of erotic charisma, but it's not something that you can make. He was born so or not. It's not a created something. It's a part of your character.
What was his attitude toward you? And I said the best way to describe him was avuncular. And I know that seems impossible. Lugosi was known as the ladies' man, and he was probably the most sexually attractive male I have ever known in my life. He could walk into a room and there was this pull from every corner, and women just flocked to him. And I thought that was sort of funny, although I could feel it.
In the 30s, American women wrote him time after time, often hoping he really was a vampire, often hoping that he really did live on maiden's blood, that they were so sexually attracted to this kind of sophisticated evil he brought to the role.
By 1931, he had already married and divorced 3 times. His last marriage, to a wealthy American widow, Beatrice Weeks, lasted just 4 days.
Do you believe in vampires?
Yes. 3 of them I married.
Lugosi was spending most of his money on luxury goods. He even imported sulfurous water from his homeland, Transylvania.
This is somebody who had a kind of a live for today, the hell with tomorrow kind of attitude towards life and towards his finances.
Universal Pictures made the most of Lugosi's mysterious background, promoting him as a slightly strange and enigmatic person.
Do you ever go to any Hollywood parties?
No, life is too short for that. I wouldn't waste my time. There are so many interesting and wonderful things in the world that a man could achieve and experience. Well, I guess I'm pretty much of a lone wolf. I don't say I don't like people at all, but to tell you the truth, I only like them if I have a chance to look deep into their heart and in their mind. If I find there's something worthwhile, some human kindness, some sympathy.
He was somebody, so with a kind of powers. In America, you cannot be a star if you don't have something very special, and he had this special, this powerful, personal energy.
The Universal PR team suggested he actually was an aristocrat from a very old family with roots in the obscure region of Transylvania. In those days, little was known about the shocking reality behind the Dracula myth. Even today, we're still trying to solve the puzzle. Austria seized control of Transylvania at the beginning of the 18th century. At the time, reports were sent back to the Imperial Court of Vienna describing the strange behavior of the local villagers. Families tormented by the ghosts of their dead relatives were said to be digging them up and destroying them. They believed their ancestors had turned into vampires. The Viennese Imperial Court sent out a group of high-ranking officials to investigate. Among them was Gerhard van Swieten, the most highly respected doctor in the empire. He studied several ritual exhumations and was surprised to see that the corpses of the dead relatives managed to stay so robust. He concluded that this was due to the extraordinary quality of the soil, which was preserving their bodies so well. He said that the evil spirits seen by the villagers were just figments of their imagination. Despite his scientific conclusions, he failed to shake off the mystery surrounding this remote region. That's why 19th century German literature was filled with tales of Transylvania, so it was no surprise when the Irish author Bram Stoker picked Transylvania as the sinister backdrop of his protagonist Count Dracula. In Romanian, the word Dracul means the devil. Even today, people in southern Transylvania strongly believe in life after death. The villagers perform rituals before a relative is buried. They urge the dead man's spirit to leave the world of the living in order to prevent him from turning into a vampire. Otilia Hedeshan is the chief anthropologist at the University of Timișoara in Romania. She has studied the funeral customs of the Transylvanian people for the last 20 years. For her, these rituals are a scientific treasure.
Sediul sufletului este fie în inimă, fie în ficat. Inima odată distrusă sau ficatul odată distrus înseamnă că mai devreme sau mai târziu omul respectiv moare. Sau, iată cum este cazul strigoiului, moare cu adevărat. Riturile acestea de disecare a pieptului strigoiului, de smulgere a inimii, de ardere a inimii, au de fapt această funcție, să distrugă acea parte a corpului care este sediul sufletului strigoiului pentru a produce mai târziu, de astă dată, această ruptură definitivă dintre suflet și corp.
Was Bela Lugosi a witness to one of these bizarre rituals? At the end of the 19th century, his hometown Lugos was a small multi-ethnic city on the border of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Little is known today about life in Lugos at the time. But one thing is certain. In the marketplace, villagers from the mountains came to sell their goods. And they also brought stories of the undead. Maybe that was something familiar for young Bela. The town's archive reveals that Bela Lugosi was in fact Bela Ferenc Dezo Blasco. According to his birth certificate, he was born in 1882 into a baker's family. Someone later crossed this out and wrote banker.
What he would say would be things that he had, for example, that he had been born of noble birth, that he was actually a count. In the 1920s in the US, he would claim he had actually been a count himself. So Lugosi concealed much of the somewhat humble beginnings he had, and that also makes it difficult to know, was his father a baker, was he a banker, was he in fact both? So this kind of mystery around Lugosi that follows him through his whole life.
His father died when he was a teenager, forcing the young Bela to find a job. He left school after only 3 years, with rather mediocre results. There is no evidence that he ever continued his education.
Later he would lie, actually, and say, once he even claimed he had gone to Oxford. When he was in America, he claimed he had gone to Oxford in a way to maybe cover the fact he had not finished formal education.
For a while, he worked in a coal mine near the city of Subotica. Nothing is known about the next 6 years of his life. But in 1905, he started using the name Lugosi. There is no explanation why he changed his name from Blaszko to Lugosi, a name related with his hometown Lugos. But what we do know is that this young man was extremely determined. In 1907, he was already performing in theatres as Hamlet and Romeo. Up until the outbreak of the First World War, Lugosi had his pick of the most prestigious theatre roles in plays by Ibsen and Shakespeare, Chekhov and Mordach. He became one of Budapest's leading lights. Looking back, one of the most intriguing roles was in a religious play where he played Jesus Christ. In America in the early 30s, Dracula was drawing more crowds into the cinema than Jesus. Over the next 20 years, Lugosi would receive countless offers for roles, all with more or less the same characteristics as Dracula.
Bela Lugosi as Murder Legendre, the sinister power behind the White Zombie.
If one gangster film, one musical did well, Hollywood wanted to make many more of the same. And so it was with Dracula, so it was with Lugosi, who was the first real horror film star in the United States, certainly of the talking era. And so they decided to put him into films like Murders in the Rue Morgue, based upon the Edgar Allan Poe story. They decided to put him into parts that would mimic the success of Dracula's horror characteristics. This, of course, meant Lugosi was typecast. He became typecast as the horror figure, the mystery man of the screen.
Watch out! They may be hovering over you, or you, or you!
Yes, of course, he was an actor, and even a good one. Why not? But because he went into this direction, or he was forced or invited to go into this direction, and this direction gave him success. So he accepted it. And this fact limited his artistic work too.
Were you satisfied with your work in the picture?
No. Whenever an actor gets satisfied with his work, he's done, he's through. You see, in the National Theatre of Hungary in Budapest, all the great character parts are played by 4 or 5 different players. Each competes with the other. Each plays a part in accordance with their own conception. And the audience is just as much interested in the actor's conception of the role than it's interested in the play itself.
Go, never dreaming I care, loving somebody somewhere, leaving me my silent love. Pooh, buddy, pooh.
Betty. You have booked your last book.
In 1932, Lugosi turned down a proposal from Universal Pictures to play Frankenstein. He still thought of himself as a serious actor and not a monster. The heavy makeup and the lack of dialogue made him reluctant to accept this role. He later conceded that this was the biggest mistake of his life. A year later, Frankenstein hit the cinemas with Boris Karloff in the starring role. The film soon outstripped the success of Dracula. Lugosi was forced to relinquish his title as Master of Horror, which sparked a period of bitter on-screen rivalry between Dracula and Frankenstein.
Lugosi was an artist, and Boris Karloff was a very good actor. It's a big difference.
It is an historic occasion whenever Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi confront each other. Their very presence weaves a spell of mystery and horror.
Ready for the test, Dracula? I'm ready, Frankenstein. Then let us begin.
But they did collaborate on a number of highly successful productions. 3 of Lugosi's best films.
You're poisoned. Poisoned? And everyone I touch is poisoned. They die.
They appeared together in The Black Cat in 1934, in The Raven in 1935, and in 1936 in a film called The Invisible Ray. And what we see happening as they appear together, the evolution of that, was that Lugosi's roles became smaller and smaller. Karloff's became larger. Karloff's name was generally the first of the 2 that were on the billing of the films, on the credits. And so Karloff continued to grow as a star, where Lugosi began to be diminished in comparison.
I had an enormous admiration for him. He was a great technician. He had a great career behind him in Europe on the stage, till he came out here and did Dracula. And I think the only thing that held him back, poor man, was for some reason, he didn't really take the trouble to master the language in which he earned his bread and butter, which is a great mistake. But he really was a fine actor.
In 1933, after another string of love affairs, Lugosi married for the 4th time. His wife, Lillian Arch, was the daughter of a prominent American-Hungarian family. Despite his marriage to Lillian, his reputation as a womanizer in Hollywood remained intact.
I remember one night when I was changing into my different costume backstage, I felt these cold lips up and down my back, and I realized that Mr. Lugosi was kissing my back. And I said to myself, well, I'm not going to say anything, he's the star, but he must have like a very strong feeling for me to be doing this. And the next thing I know, the next day, he actually came up to me and said, I would like you to tour with me as Lucy in Dracula. Of course, you would have to be my baby. And I said to myself, that's an expression I haven't heard before, but I think I know what he means.
Igor, who appeared in Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein, was one of Lugosi's most polished screen performances.
Father was Frankenstein, that your mother was the lightning.
His face has become so associated with horror that he has much difficulty finding any other work. And for a couple of years, in the late 30s, he's virtually without any film roles. He's increased financial problems. His first son is born in this period, and so it becomes a major strain on this man who is approaching 60 years old.
My father's friends were mostly musicians and artists and people of that sort, not the typical Hollywood crowd. And one of the regulars at his party was a Hungarian pianist, Erwin Nyíregyházy, who became very famous for his Chopin recordings. But he would play so long and so hard that there would actually be blood on the piano keys.
Dracula is an interesting character because he's the undead. He's caught in a nether region between life and death. And I think that there's a parallel with Lugosi, who never fully became an American in every sense of that word, and yet he never could return to the place of his birth, his heritage. And so he too was caught, like Dracula, between two worlds, never fully part of one or the other.
Typecast as a horror actor, Lugosi couldn't get any other roles. In Hollywood, he was Count Dracula who never dies. Lugosi had reinvented Dracula. He had given the monster a human face. But in the early 40s, desperate for jobs, he was forced to conceal his face under layers of hair and makeup. Ironically, in 1943, Lugosi found himself playing the very character he had turned down more than 10 years before, Frankenstein. Under the makeup, he was completely unrecognizable, and at the last moment, the studio executives even cut all his lines. The film was a disaster for Lugosi's career.
He couldn't collect his energy to create something new. When he lost his success, he lost himself.
As part of the war effort, Lugosi assisted the American authorities by promoting blood donation.
Here, for instance, is Bela Lugosi, the screen's #1 vampire who's decided to pay back some of that blood that he's borrowed. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a scene in which any actor really gives his best. Well, of all things, coffee and donuts. No, Bela, you mustn't. Remember your career. How can fans believe you're a werewolf if they've seen you dunking? Another illusion gone. It's getting so a man can't even believe in vampires anymore.
Recent documents reveal that at the time, several American Hungarians had testified against Lugosi, claiming that he was a communist. The FBI stepped in, and for 10 years, they kept records of all Dracula's anti-American activities.
One of the interesting things about Lugosi in the 1940s is that he becomes president of a Hungarian-American organization. Ostensibly, it's to help in the war effort, to help war-torn Hungary, but there are many communist figures that are involved in this organization. This organization actually causes J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI to begin an investigation of Lugosi. The FBI begins watching him, reading his mail. The Immigration and Naturalization Service also begins to keep a file on him.
The FBI was suspicious of Lugosi because of his involvement in the 1919 Communist Revolution in Budapest, which was led by Hungary's Lenin Bela Kun. At the time, Lugosi was chairman of the Actors' Union. When the new communist government took office, Lugosi was charged with nationalizing Hungary's cinemas and theaters.
Lugosi becomes a member of the government. He's actually, the newspapers there report him being allowed to leave his service at the National Theater to become head of a kind of division of the government for actors, for the theater, and for entertainment. And there are surviving orders that he signed that suggest he, if not a powerful figure, certainly he was a member of the government that had some authority.
Army supplies were low, and Comrade Lugosi signed an official order which prohibited the newly formed Hungarian army, the Lenin Boys, from seizing actors' underwear.
He believed in the actors' union. He believed that even though actors were exempt from the military, that he should nevertheless serve his country in the war, and he did serve in World War I. At any rate, he had very strong beliefs, and that got him into trouble.
He was a very engaged character. He was a trade union fighter. He was a political fighter. Even in America, he was one of the persons who created the Actors Guild. So he was a very active person.
You're Hungarian, aren't you, Mr. Lugosi?
Yes, I am. What I mean, I'm Hungarian by birth. I'm an American now.
Well, why did you leave Hungary?
Political reasons. After the war, I participated in the revolution, and later, I found myself on the wrong side.
The communist regime soon collapsed. Lugosi feared capital punishment and escaped to Vienna with his first wife. It was then that he decided to try his luck in America. It is now obvious that the birth of Dracula, as a highly successful modern myth, was the result of a chain of events triggered by Lugosi's communist beliefs.
Calling the House Un-American Activities Committee to order, Chairman J. Parnell Thomas of New Jersey opens an inquiry into possible communist penetration of the Hollywood film industry. The committee is seeking to determine if Red Party members have reached the screen with subversive propaganda. A long list of prominent motion picture witnesses appear before the committee. Speaking for the films, Eric Johnston, president of the Motion Picture Association, talks frankly concerning the attitude of the producers.
We are accused of having communists and communist sympathizers in our employ. Undoubtedly, there are such persons in Hollywood, as you will find elsewhere in America. But we neither shield nor defend them. We want them exposed.
He was very careful to avoid any ties to communism from the 1920s, and that was something that he continued in the decades later. He never admitted any communist ties, and very much kept that vague, confused, intentionally so, to avoid problems.
Dracula as a communist. And this was no joke for the studio executives in Hollywood. His name was put on the blacklist, and none of the big studios would work with him. After nearly 100 films, American producers had made a fortune out of him, yet suddenly, the doors to the film city had been closed for the former master of horror.
Our next guest, one of the great stars of the stage and screen. And Bela, I can make that introduction without any qualms and without any reservations, because I don't know whether you know it or not, but Bela Lugosi, of course, always appears in the vampire pictures, Dracula and so forth. But among the trade, he is considered one of the finest actors ever to come out of Europe. And that was many years ago, Bela, wasn't it? I think in Hungary?
You see, I'm 30 years here in America, and 8 months ago I was called to come to England to revive the American version of Dracula.
Doesn't Dracula ever end for you?
No. Dracula never ends. I don't know whether I shall call it a fortune or a course, but it never ends.
It was the greatest success. The whole world appreciated him as Dracula, and he remained Dracula. And when he was old, he couldn't escape from this role.
I'm back here! Yes, man. What are you doing? What are you going to hypnotize me?
Now look at me.
I'm looking at you. What are you doing? Oh, sleep. I'm asleep. Sleep.
I'm hypnotized.
Now you're in my command. Sit down, you're under my power.
I'm under your
Sit
power.
down here on that chair and I will lock the door.
You kill people on the screen, you also kill jokes.
The character evolved over the years. Rather than being a vision of horror, as time went on, the character became something that was seen as old-fashioned, outmoded. Lugosi began to play the part in such a way that people laughed rather than were frightened.
In the early 50s, his on-screen career was over. Instead, he was paid to promote other people's horror films, like The House of Wax.
He makes live appearances across the United States, sometimes in low-budget productions where even his wife Lillian has to play the woman he bites in small stage versions of Dracula in various towns across the United States. This brings about a great deal of depression in Lugosi's life. He's no longer a major film star. He believes he's reduced to kind of a freak status.
After 20 years of marriage, his relationship with Lillian Arch was coming to an end. Soon the papers were spreading stories that Dracula was addicted to drugs. In 1953, Lugosi made a rare appearance on the popular TV show You Asked For It. Old and tired, he couldn't hide the effects of his regular dose of morphine.
You asked for
it. In the same year, he got a job in a small production by an unknown film director, Ed Wood Jr.
Surgery, the removal of the man and the formation of the woman.
Glenn, or Glenda, was an artistic and financial disaster.
A story must be told.
The world is shocked by a person who changed his sex. Thus, the strange case of Glenn, who was Glenda, one and the same person, not half man, half woman, but nevertheless, man and woman in the same body.
Wood was hoping to get more and more into Hollywood filmmaking, and here was somebody who still had a bit of a name. But Lugosi's career was virtually non-existent, and so he relied on Wood for work.
Bravo! Take the girl to my quarters.
Another offer followed. Later, Ed Wood was considered the worst director to ever come out of Hollywood. The Bride of the Monster was another flop. Despite his determination, Lugosi's comeback failed. His personal problems and continuing drug addiction sent him in a downward spiral. He wasn't seen on screen for many years, and most Americans believed him already dead. Count Dracula was ready to exit the world stage. But Bela was a fighter and decided to check himself into a hospital to be cured from his morphine addiction. Surprisingly, after only 3 months, Lugosi was given a full bill of health. Lugosi was the first film star in the history of American cinema who publicly admitted that he was addicted to drugs.
He was given 3 months in a state-run hospital, during which time he was weaned of drug use and also alcohol. In the end, Dracula, who had developed this drug abuse, was finally cured. And it was the moment of his last great U.S. publicity as a result.
Mr. Lugosi, you're leaving the state hospital tomorrow.
Yes, I'm very happy I do, on account that I became a new man,
New lease of life. I'm cured. I feel like $1 million.
You feel like Dracula really felt, huh?
Sure.
At his best.
I was looking forward to work again.
I understand that.
At a very late age in life, he turned himself in to be cured and came out of the hospital completely cured. And I think it was a very heroic effort to do that because he took a lot of heat from it. And I'm very proud of how he was able to take control of his life and lick a problem that he had.
I'm looking forward to see my fans again in my next picture.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Soon he married again, for the 5th time, and again to a woman 30 years younger than him. Hope Liniger was a devoted Dracula fan.
She was half his age in 1955 when she was writing him as he was being rehabilitated from drug use. And she signed all of her letters a dash of hope to try and encourage him while he was fighting this drug addiction. The relationship between them grew more strained. They married so quickly they hadn't really known each other. She had known him through films on screen. He was probably very happy about finding a new companion and a young woman. But as time wore on, the problems between them became more apparent. Lugosi was even thinking about divorcing her the last month of his life, and presumably would have had he not died in August 1956.
In 1956, Lugosi was found dead in his small apartment in Hollywood Hills. Legend has it that he died with a new script in his hand, The Final Curtain. His family and friends buried him dressed in his Count Dracula costume. A year later, Ed Wood's new film was released, Plan 9 from Outer Space. This really was Lugosi's last appearance on screen. In order to shoot the last scenes, Lugosi's character was played by Ed Wood's chiropractor, with his face hidden.
Things to come. See this blast of screen suspense, for it could be happening right now.
With a little bit of money and a small camera, Wood filmed Lugosi in a cemetery that was being excavated and moved. And he had a quick opportunity to shoot some scenes of Lugosi wearing his cape, silent footage. Once Lugosi died, Wood combined this footage with other new material he shot, and it became a science fiction film called Plan 9 from Outer Space, which has had the reputation, in the United States of being the worst movie ever made.
Bullets bounce off their bodies. Rockets, missiles, jets cannot stop their death ships. What earthly power can stop this terror?
Ed Wood killed Lugosi because he gave him a last chance to play Dracula again when he was 70, I don't know how many years old. When Dracula, the role, killed himself completely as a last chance, Ed Wood, as his best friend, offered him a cheap role to play Dracula again. And with this good will, killed his best friend.
In the original Dracula film, Lugosi's character finally dies when a scientist, Van Helsing, finds the vampire's coffin and drives a stake through his heart. At the University of Timișoara in Romania, hundreds of documents tell of similar procedures performed over the last 2 centuries, and not by actors, but by real people.
Granițele dintre viață și moarte nu sunt pentru această lume tradițională atât de limpezi cum par ele pentru omul rațional din secolul 20 și 21.
The last documented ritual exhumation in Romania was in February 2004, when police and prosecutors discovered that a body was removed from its grave in the middle of the night. The heart had been extracted from the chest and destroyed. For the villagers in this area, just 700 kilometers from Vienna, this was the traditional answer to a life-threatening problem. For prosecutors and the media, it amounted to desecration. They were just a group of people who had fallen victim to paranormal magazines and horror films like Dracula.
Toate poveștile despre strigoi sunt doar partea ceva mai umbroasă a unui sistem de credințe extrem de coerent, foarte sofisticat, extrem de profund, care privește legăturile între cei vii și între cei morți.
Today, Transylvania shows that sometimes reality is more powerful than fiction. Lugosi left this world in 1956, never answering a fundamental question. How important was his birthplace for the creation of Count Dracula?
Mr. Lugosi, are you interested in...
Pardon me. I'm coming.
Why, I didn't hear anyone calling.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I understand.
You can make a 24 hours documentary film of Bela Lugosi, and nobody can tell you who he was, and you will never know who was Bela Lugosi. This is mystery.